Hello, so GPSR, the gift that just keeps on giving. Northern Ireland, what does it mean for anyone selling into Northern Ireland, particularly if you are based in the rest of the UK? So I'm just going to share some documents and we're going to go through some documents yet again, because that's really all we can do. There's so much speculation out there. And the trouble is, different people interpret the regulations differently, and rather than try and tell you only my interpretation for you to go away and run with that, for us to discover that actually the actual one is slightly different, I want you to be able to make your own opinions. So let's just share. Let's get on with it, shall we? So this is EU Regulation 2023-988 on general product safety fact sheet. This was published on the 3rd of December. As you can see here, it applies to Northern Ireland. So we're going to go through this quite quickly. And we also have detailed guidance here as well. Oh, hold on. I've got had a notification on my screen. Got rid of that now. Okay, so this is the fact sheet, and we'll start with this one. So from the 13th of December 2024, we already know this, there are changes to general product safety rules in Northern Ireland. Yes, because it's a member state, so it's impacted by the GPSR. Many UK businesses that sell goods in Northern Ireland will already be going further than these requirements, and therefore will have sufficient arrangements in place to be able to comply with these changes. Where changes are needed, a detailed guidance is available, a summary of what this means for businesses included below. So let's go through the summary and then go through the detailed. So we'll scan the summary. GPSR in Northern Ireland from the 13th of December. We know all this. It's dual and applies within the EU to facilitate dual access to both the UK internal market and EU single market. Northern Ireland applies certain EU product safety regulations, including GPSR. Certain new obligations therefore apply with respect to Northern Ireland from the 13th of December. The following note provides an overview. And again, this link is the other one we have open. We'll go there. So GPSR requires that certain consumer products based on the NI market are safe and establish specific obligations for businesses to ensure safety. For products regulated by GPSR to be placed on the market, there must be a responsible economic operator. So this is the responsible person. This is the someone to represent you within Europe to ensure compliance tasks are fulfilled. The regulations also introduce certain requirements with respect to product labelling, traceability and documentation, as well as clarifying that online marketplaces in scope of regulations. We know all this. What this means, there are various ways to meet GPSR, and most UK businesses that sell goods in Northern Ireland are likely to have sufficient arrangements in place, as the rules in many cases formalise the reality of how businesses are already operating in the UK in order to be able to sell goods into the EU. We're sounding positive so far. Where changes may be required, the more detailed guidance should provide clarity to businesses as how to come into compliance. That's why we'll look at it next. In line with the regulator's code, enforcement continues to be proportionate, risk-based and intelligent-led, with a focus on helping bring businesses into compliance where possible before considering other forms of enforcement action. So it's nice to actually see that in black and white, that they want to help businesses come into compliance. They're not immediately going to come down as hard as they could, though it will all depend on it being proportionate and risk-based and intelligent-led. So basically, it depends what you're up to. GPSR applies to certain consumer products, but in practice does not introduce substantive new obligations where there's product-specific regulation already in place. It includes a series of exemptions as detailed in the guidance, including but not limited to human and veterinary services, food, feed and antiques. GPSR updates the requirements on manufacturers, importers and distributors of products and introduces new obligations on providers of online marketplaces and fulfillment service providers. Some of these are explained below, and more details on what businesses need to do are provided in the guidance. And here's the guidance. We've already read the guidance. There is another video where I talk and walk through all of that. Businesses should note that in accordance with Article 51 of GPSR, the regulation only applies to products placed on the market from 13th of December 2024. No action is to be taken for products that have already been placed on the market in Northern Ireland before the 13th of December 2024 and which comply with relevant pre-existing product safety legislation. Now, this is a really interesting one because I genuinely don't know how they are going to prove or disprove this, particularly in the short term. Longer term makes more sense, but initially, I mean, anything that's placed on the market within the next 6-12 months, how are you going to prove whether it was or wasn't on before the 13th of December 2024? My instinct is that this will be provided through your EU representative having that documentation, because if you're selling products from before the 13th of December 2024, you're going to carry on putting new products on the market after the 13th of December 2024. So you're still going to need that EU representative, and they will hold both sets of documentation, albeit one is just proving it was on the market beforehand and the other one is all your technical documentation to comply. If you only have products that were placed on the market before the 13th of December 2024, I've no clue how they will track this, or you will prove this, or any of that if you don't have an EU representative. So whilst that seems like amazingly great news, I think it still also raises other questions, and isn't something you can just go, oh yeah, it's fine, it's that. You can go that way and decide, you know what, I'll be fine because it was on the market before. Okay, but how are you going to prove it? That's what you need to make sure that you can do. Because we don't know exactly what they're asking for and how to do that yet. So, responsible economic operators under GPSR. For products regulated by GPSR to be placed on the Northern Ireland market, there must be, this is the bit that makes me sad. I was really hoping that between the rest of the UK that this wouldn't happen, but it does say there must be an REO established in NI or in the EU to ensure compliance tasks. They still want that authority, that representative, and to inform relevant authorities of any product safety incidents. This obligation already exists for many products, but is now being extended to consumer products captured by GPSR. Established means having a presence in Northern Ireland or in the EU. This can be a registered office, headquarters, or any permanent place of business, retail outlet, distribution centre, or other function in that country. For an individual, this can be the place where you are resident. Remember, even if it's an individual, the address and contact details have to be provided with your product so that authorities and consumers can potentially get in touch about anything that's happened with or without the product. The REO's contact and other details, there you go, I've preempted it, must be indicated on the product or in its packaging, the parcel, or an accompanying document. Accompanying documentation may include, though is not limited to, a store receipt or other dispatch or shipping documentation. It's provided alongside a document and does not need to be with the same packaging as the product itself, as long as it accompanies the product. What I like about this, that actually feels like there's a bit more detail in this, and we still have the detailed one to go through. Labelling and traceability. So we know the core things to do with GPSR are labelling, traceability, documentation, and having that EU representative. Labelling traceability. Manufacturers will need to ensure a product can be identified by consumers in an easily visible and legible way. This includes batch or serial number or any other identifying element. This is basically that if you've got something that's made within the same batch, they're going to assume it's got the same level of risk if there's a problem with it. So they're going to want to pull everything from there. If the size and or nature of the product does not allow this, the information should be described on the packaging or in accompanying documentation as described above. Where a product is not compliant, an importer or distributor may bring the product into compliance, for example, by adding the necessary instructions or information without returning the product to the manufacturer. So as much as the onus is on the manufacturer, if there's somebody who actually wants to import or distribute this, they can be the ones that bring it up to scratch and up to standard. Online marketplaces, obligations on marketplaces are set out in the business guidance and include requirements to designate contact points, to have processes in place to comply with GPSR, and to cooperate with market surveillance authorities. For clarity, the GPSR does not create any obligation for online marketplaces to preemptively identify and remove products from their platforms which replace, but it does actually ask them to voluntarily do that. So it might say it does not create any obligation, but if I remember correctly from reading it through, it does say they want them to volunteer to start to pick this up. Neither is the GPSR intended to amount to a general obligation on online marketplaces to monitor the information which they transmit or store, nor is it intended to require online marketplaces to actively seek facts or circumstances indicating illegal activity. Enforcement. In line with the regulator's code, the enforcement continues to be proportionate, risk-based and intelligent-led, minimising disruption to compliant UK businesses. Businesses are obliged to cooperate with market surveillance authorities and comply with any actions taken by market surveillance authority. Authorities continue to have an initial focus on providing effective advice and support for UK businesses, helping them to understand and meet any new obligations they have and applying their discretion as businesses adapt. Okay. I don't think there's anything particularly new in that, other than it's nice to see that, yes, they're still talking about the fact they want to help businesses understand and meet obligations. This doesn't mention anything to do with SMEs or micro businesses specifically. Interesting that it kind of talks down the obligations of marketplaces, when I know that there is an angle in the actual regulations about voluntary, what they'll do on a voluntary basis. It's about labelling traceability. It's about having and it's interesting, they keeps referring to responsible economic operators, whereas we've heard the phrase economic operators before, but it's normally a responsible person under the EU, whereas they've labelled it slightly differently, which just goes to show that each of the EU states will, again, and this adds complication, interpret the regulations slightly differently. I like the fact that even though Article 51 is like the last section of the regulations, it's like thrown in at the end that we've got this after you've read everything else. And I like the fact they put it in earlier. It's as if to emphasize it. If you're already on the market, you don't need to worry about it. No action needs to be taken. But again, it is assuming that you are already compliant to any other regulations that apply to your product and your product categories. But at some point, there's going to be a crossover there where you're going to have to prove. Early days, you're going to get away with it a bit more, I would imagine. Again, I need to add here, as I've just said, you'll get away with it, I'll imagine. I'm not a lawyer. I am not giving you legal advice. We are reading through this together to see what it means. There are contact details here. If you have any concerns about compliance or supplying products, you can contact these email addresses. I'm going to leave that on the screen just there, so if you want to screenshot it and take a copy, you can. I will also put a link to this document in the description. Yeah, that's the first one. Let's dig into the details and let's have a look, see what I've put in here. So you can see this basically looks like it is exactly the same thing, except it has detailed guidance. Again, this was published on the 3rd of December. You've got to love that this comes in. Well, we're now 8 days away, but this was 10 days away when they're actually publishing this. It's bonkers. Anyway, guidance for businesses placing products on the market. You can see this is a little bit longer, but we're going to go through it. From the 13th of December, it applies in the I will skip the things that we just go, yeah, we know that. We know what we're here for that bit. Products regulated by GPSR to be placed in the market, there must be a responsible economic operator in place to ensure compliance tasks are fulfilled. And these are set out in Article 4 of the EU Regulation on Market Surveillance and Compliance. You know, I'm going to open that link. This guidance explains GPSR requirements in the context of goods placed on the market. Oh, we have a footnote. There are various ways to meet the regulation, and most UK businesses that sell goods in Northern Ireland will have sufficient arrangements in place, as the rules in many cases formalise the reality. It's basically exactly what we read before. If adjustments are needed, this guideline outlines what to do. No, this guidance is not intended to be exhaustive, but to assist you in understanding GPSR. Maybe I shouldn't use that phrase in these videos. This guidance is not intended to be exhaustive, but is aiming to assist you in understanding GPSR. Exactly this. If you're not clear on your obligations, you should seek independent legal advice. That stands for this video too. This guidance is particularly relevant to businesses in Great Britain selling products that NI market in which do not have a presence in the EU. That's good. That's what we want. These businesses should note that there are private sector services available if an EU or NI representative is required. Okay, online marketplaces. But so basically, I mean, we'd already read this in that last section, but there is a requirement that you need to have a representative in Northern Ireland. And that's just confirmed it, because they're now going, there are private sector services, so they want you to go and pay for it. You can sign up for a trader support service if general inquiries and concerns about the changes have made their way to goods moving in and out of Northern Ireland. So I'm going to open that as well. Let's go have a quick look at that. If you move goods in and out of Northern Ireland, the Trader Support Service will guide you through any changes due to implementation of the Windsor Framework. So, okay, that's specifically the Windsor Framework, which I presume they will have updated to include GPSR, but it does say last updated June 2023. So it might not yet. Oops, where was I? I was there. We're keen to hear from business other questions and concerns. No, that we're keen to hear. So if you've got any questions or concerns, please contact these email addresses. NI-based businesses continue to benefit from unfettered access protections as set out in the UK internal market. This, sorry, I just like the word unfettered. This allows for goods that can be sold in Northern Ireland to be sold in the rest of the UK without needing to meet any further regulatory requirements. So that we're going to be able to sell back to us. Businesses should note section 7 of this guidance, which details transitional measures in GPSR, including regulation applies only to products placed on the market from December 2024. No action needs to be taken for products that have already been placed on the market and which are in compliance with the 2005 UK GPSR. Okay, so I'm going to make an assumption that we're all in compliance with the 2005 UK GPSR. It clearly states again, no action needs to be taken. Okay, I'm going to sidebar here for a second for, let's lose it, legal term, even though I'm not that lawyer. But the sidebar here is that it's how easy is it going to be be able to sell into Northern Ireland with some products and not with others? Now, that's going to depend on the platform that you're using. But the reality is that if you're using this get out clause, that you're going to end up with, because let's say you put a new product on in February 2025, you can't sell that into Northern Ireland without having the EU representative, the technical documentation, all the labelling in place and all that transparency about who your business is and they're being contactable. That in theory, you don't need for anything that was already on the market. Having that distinction is not easy. And you've still got to prove that things were on the market before the 13th of December. You can't put something on the 18th of December and then go, oh, I'm going to fudge it and pretend it was on before. At some point, somebody could come and ask you to prove that. Probably won't, but they could. So you've got to be really careful with this. And as much as it's stating this, it's not telling us how we prove it. It's not giving us that extra piece of information. So yes, if you want to kind of continue selling into Northern Ireland based on this, brilliant, but that isn't the end of the story. You do need to prove it, and you're going to be not able to add anything else to go into Northern Ireland after this date unless you have everything else from the regulations in place. Right, let's carry on. UK authorities will continue to take proportionate risk-based intelligence-led approach to the enforcement of the rules, minimising disruption to compliant businesses, including using compliance advice and guidance to assist businesses in addressing actual, suspected or potential non-compliance. Okay, scope. Right. Most of this is going to repeat what we already know, but let's go through. It requires all consumer products based on the Northern Ireland and EU markets are safe and establish specific obligations for business to ensure that safety. The regulation applies to products placed on or made available to the market where there are no sector-specific provisions with the same objective. The regulation does not apply to, and we've gone through these before. I do know that when we look at animal byproducts and derived products, things like natural yarn, you think, oh, they're not affected by these. No, but they are affected by other regulations, which will cover everything and that you need to do. So even if you're going, oh, I fall into one of those, you will be covered by a different set of regulations. That's why these are excluded. It's not because they just can get away with doing anything. It really is because there's something else out there. There is another regulation you need to be adhering to, complying with. The regulation applies to products placed on or made available to the market which are new, used, repairs or reconditions. It does not apply to products intended to be repaired or reconditioned prior to being used where these products are clearly marked as such. So if you're sending something somewhere for them to fix it, that is allowed to get through. This regulation does not apply to products being placed on or made available to the GB market. These products will continue to be regulated by the General Product Safety Regulations 2005. As noted above, NI benefits from unfettered access. We've read that before. Economic operators shall place or make available to the market only safe products. So if you have a product that has failed a regulation CE mark, if you failed it, if it doesn't pass the tests, you cannot sell it in Europe. That's basically what this is saying. And if it does pass, you need to have all the documentation in place that proves all of that. So when assessing whether a product is a safe product, economic operators should consider the following aspects. The characteristics of the product, including its design, technical features, composition, packaging, instructions for assembly, and if applicable for installation, use, and maintenance. The effect that other products might have on the product being assessed. I'm skipping through these because I've covered these in multiple other videos. The effect the product has on other products, the representation of the product, the labeling, including label regarding age suitability for children, the categories of consumers using the product, in particular vulnerable consumers such as children, old people, and persons with disabilities, as well as any impact gender differences it might have on health and safety. The appearance of a product is likely to lead consumers to use the product in a way differently to what it was designed for, in particular food imitating products. Used by children, where a product is not designed or intended to be used by children, but is likely to be used by children or resembles a commonly recognized object that would appeal to children. When required by the nature of the product, the appropriate cybersecurity features needed to protect the product against external influences where an influence might impact the safety of the product. So we're talking Internet of Things. And when required by the nature of the product, any evolving, learning, and predictive functionalities of the product. So anything that uses AI. Obligations of manufacturers. Okay. I feel like I'm repeating myself, which is why I'm like, but again, this is now what we're seeing now is we're seeing Northern Ireland's interpretation of GPSR. So it's the same, but written slightly differently. So manufacturers ensure that a product complies with the general safety requirements outlined in the regulation before placing it on the market. Carry out internal risk assessment and draw up technical documentation on the product before placing it on the market. Technical documentation should provide a general description of the product and characteristics relevant for assessing its safety. Ensure the product can be identified by consumers in an easily visible and legible way. This includes batch or serial number or any other identifying element. If the size and or nature of the product does not allow this, the information should be provided on the packaging or in a document accompanying the product. You need to indicate name, registered trade name, registered trademark, postal electronic address, and if different, the postal or electronic address of the single contact point that consumers can contact them on. See, this is where I get annoyed. The single contact point to me is the EU representative or the economic operator, as far as Northern Ireland refer to it. It's not specific here. So again, this is open to interpretation. That's my interpretation. This can be a link to a web page, but it must be reasonably straightforward for the consumer to identify from that link where and how to make contact, which I find quite ironic because my reading of this is that the manufacturer's information needs to be on there, the distributor's information, the importer's information, the EU representative information, and suddenly you've got 4 different people's information. So to make it reasonably straightforward is who do they contact in what circumstance? That's got to come into this. Sorry. That was me on a tangent. Where a product cannot be safely used as intended without it, ensure that products are accompanied with clear instructions and safety information in a language consumers can easily understand. That's usually going to be their home country, but even though it doesn't state that. So again, you can be open to interpretation. Where a manufacturer believes a product it has placed on the market is dangerous, it shall immediately take corrective measures, including withdrawal or recall of the product, inform affected consumers of corrective measures, and inform the market surveillance authorities. Importers need to. So basically, I'm going to skip through this section, but basically it's almost very, very similar to the manufacturers, except they are checking that the product has complied with the requirements to carry out the internal risk and draw up with the technical documentation and to include the certain traceability information before placing it on the market. So if it isn't already there, they need to add it. They can bring it up to scratch. It is their responsibility if they are importing products not to place the product on the market if they doesn't comply or conform. And they also need to then inform the manufacturer. So it becomes an up and down situation with travel of information. Again, indicate. See, look, told you more. Indicate their name, registered. I mean, if it's the same, if it's manufacturer, if you're doing everything, then it's only going to be yours. But you could have so many different points of contact. Ensure where necessary products are accompanied with clear instructions and safety information in a language consumers can easily understand. And this is important for importers and for distributors. Not jeopardize the conformity of a product to general safety requirements while it is under their responsibility during storage and transport. So again, obligations of the distributors. I'm not going to read through because I think if you're watching my video, you're probably one and the same from the manufacturer, the distributor, and the importer all in one. You're doing all the jobs. But if you're not, if you are a distributor, come back and read this section. Obligations of online marketplaces. Again, I went through this in the video where I read through all of the GPSR in full. It's a 3.5-hour video. You're welcome to go and watch it. You get this bit, you get this bit, and it's in far more detail than this. But I'm not going to read this other than to say that the online marketplaces have quite a lot of responsibility now. And of course, they'll be passing that on to their sellers. It should be noted that depending on the service, where are we? This is still this. Right, the same entity can fall into different categories of supply chain actor, which is exactly what I'm saying there. For many of you, you will be the manufacturer, the distributor, and the importer, exporter. You know what I mean? Including different categories of economic operator, and therefore have to comply with the obligations applicable to the relevant category. For instance, if a provider of an online marketplace sells its own branded products, it would be considered to be a manufacturer and need to comply with the applicable requirements of manufacturers as regards those products. So you need to decide what's your role with your product to know which parts of this you need to comply with. Ultimately, it's got to comply with all of it. It is likely that most UK businesses that these obligations are to apply to already have sufficient arrangements for compliance in place. This is annoying me, this statement. Or will be able to implement the relevant arrangements without significant difficulty. I think that without significant difficulty or already have in place is really inconsiderate of small micro businesses who do not have the funds available, do not have the profit within their business to be able to go and afford to take on an representative, an economic operator within an EU state. I think this is annoying me. We will move on. For clarity, GPSR does not create any obligation for online marketplaces to preemptively identify. We've read that earlier. Neither is it nothing above affects any obligations of the provider. An online marketplace has to cooperate with MSAs or obligations. Market authorities is that one. You get obligations of authorised representatives. I have a separate video on this as well, which is going through all of those. So I'm going to skim this, but they are a natural legal person that the manufacturer appoints to represent them and carry out certain duties on their behalf. I think they say it's on the manufacturer, because if you're a manufacturer and distributor, then you're not inside the EU, you need it. But otherwise, distributors and importers are likely to be inside the EU. If a manufacturer appoints an authorised representative, there must be a written mandate in place specifying the tasks that the authorised representative agrees to and is authorised to carry out on the manufacturer's behalf. So an important contract basically is in place. Name, registered trade name or registered trademark, contact details of the responsible economic operator. Again, change the words in an authorised representative here, but we're talking about the responsible economic operator here. Must be indicates one and the same. I indicated it on the product or on its own packaging, the parcel, or an accompanying document. Accompanying document may include, though is not limited to, a store receipt or other dispatch or shipping documentation. What's nice about this is it doesn't say this sentence within the GPSR itself. So it's nice to know that it may include, though not limited to, a store receipt or other dispatch shipping documentation. So it might be that we've just got to expand what we put on our documentation rather than trying to include reams and reams and reams and reams of stuff. What businesses need to do, what is a responsible economic operator, and what are the obligations that come with it. Article 16 of the GPSR sets out products can only be placed on or made available to the NI market if there is a responsible economic operator. Various ways to meet the requirements. Businesses should review this guidance to make certain their arrangements are sufficient or make necessary changes. So, role of the responsible economic operator is to cooperate with the relevant authorities and ensure reports of product safety incidents where required by Article 20. The economic operator has responsible for the following compliance tasks: a verified documentation. Verified documentation has been drawn up and contains, as applicable, analysis of possible risks related to products and solutions to eliminate or mitigate risks, the list of any relevant standards that can apply to the product, including declaration of conformity, in order to meet the general safety requirement of Article 5 of the GPSR. They must verify the product itself has the following information on it, which is why I keep saying that you need someone who knows what they're doing to be the responsible person or the economic operator inside the EU for you. As explained above, accompanying documentation may include, though is not limited to, a store receipt or the dispatcher, a type, batch or serial number, manufacturer's name, registered trade name, registered trademark, postal and electronic address, clear instructions and safety information, unless such instructions and safety information are not required. So you don't have to make something up for this. If they're required, you have to include them where a product can be used safely and intended by the manufacturer without such documentation. Don't they? Keep documentation, to keep the technical documentation at the disposal of the market authorities for a period of 10 years from the date the product is placed on the market, and ensure that technical documentation can be made available to authorities upon request. So if you place a product on the market on the 15th of December and you're selling into the EU and you have an EU representative, that information needs to be available for 10 years. Now, whether that means that you can't change an EU representative because those details, contact details have gone out with a product, and if in 9 years' time that product comes to the eyes of a market authority and they will contact the person who's on there. Well, what if that person is no longer your contact and you've changed? Again, this is one of those other little areas that I go, how does that work? Yeah, we will wait and see. So also provide documentation if a reasoned request is made by a market authority. Provide all information and documentation as necessary. Notify of a risk, cooperate and take necessary action. Established means having a presence in Northern Ireland or the EU. It cannot simply be a postal box address. So that's interesting to see, because I know people will be thinking that, oh, I can get a postal box, a PO box over there and sort it out, but you can't. It's specifically is covered. For a business, this can be a registered office, headquarters, or permanent place of business. For an individual, this can be the place where you are a resident. Economic operator can be the manufacturer, so the manufacturer can be their own economic operator. All of these are classed in GPSR as economic operators. So this is where Northern Ireland are slightly wording it differently. The importer, authorised representative, and the fulfilment service provider. Though the fulfilment service provider may or may not be your representative in the country. There's not a service that all of them will provide. My understanding is they can opt out, if that makes any sense, and say, no, that's not us. We are simply providing a fulfillment service. Double check me on that one. For a product to be placed on the NI or EU market, one of the economic operators listed above must be in place in the supply chain, and they must fulfill the compliance duties outlined in Section 5. So one of these has to be based inside the EU. Where there is no responsible economic operator established in or EU already, the manufacturer placing the product on the market should take steps to ensure someone is in place to undertake those compliance tasks, or the product cannot be placed on the market. We can't get it any clearer than that, folks. They are not going to take away that responsibility between the rest of the UK and Northern Ireland. Businesses should note that there are private sector. That's what I was hoping for. I was really hoping that it was that element. I think all products need to be safe. I don't have an issue with having the technical documentation and all of that side and complying to any regulations that come to your products. I think that we need to do that. We have a responsibility to our customers to do that. The part that I know is the make or break is that EU representative. That extra role, that extra can make a product unviable, can make that area of selling into there as unviable. And that's what I was hoping that they would ease back on, and they haven't. Businesses should know there are private sector services available if an EU or NI representative is required, but the cost of that can be prohibitive for some. Online marketplaces may also provide this service. Interestingly, I didn't pick that up whilst reading GPSR. I may have read it and gone through because you do glaze over a little bit. I didn't pick that up, and I am unaware of any marketplaces that want to take that on. Because somebody within that, and if they do, there will be a charge, still be a charge for it, because they need someone to check all that documentation. They need someone to respond. It's a hell of a responsibility to do that. It's not a task to take on lightly. Where a manufacturer has not arranged for an unauthorised representative with an EU or NI, an importer, or e.g. a retailer seeking to sell those products in Northern Ireland, or a fulfilment service provider where no other economic operator is established, will act as the responsible economic. It's basically, you can sell direct. You're basically you're selling via the importer, they act as that person, they can make it. And the retailer, if you're selling direct to them, they take on that responsibility. The name, registered trademark, postal address of the responsible economic operator must be indicated on the product or its packaging, the parcel, and accompanying document. This may include, but is not limited to, a receipt, dispatch document, or other shipping document. Movement of goods. Movement of goods from GB to NI. The GPSR applies in Northern Ireland. You can't get much clearer than that, can you? That's a simple, short sentence. For a GB-based business wanting to place a product on or make a product available to the Northern Ireland market, it will have to comply with the requirements of the regulation. This makes me sad. Even though we know it because I've already read through it, it's still making me feel sad. This includes the responsible economic operator requirement outlined in Section 3. You can't get any clearer than that. If a GB-based business has already taken steps to trade in the EU, it will not have to make any additional changes to operate in the NI. In other words, if you have got yourself a representative who is based in France, that will cover you for Northern Ireland because you only need one somewhere in the EU. It's not per state, it is per the EU to sell to all states, as it will already meet the requirement of the regulation. Most UK businesses that sell goods in NI will likely have sufficient arrangements in place to, in order, again, that sentence, sufficient arrangements in place already to sell into the EU, except this role. Movement of goods from Northern Ireland to GB, not affected, basically. Unfettered access. Market surveillance, where dangerous products have been identified. Market surveillance authorities, I've referred to them as market authorities, but they're market surveillance authorities, may request from the manufacturer information on other products produced in the same way or with similar characteristics which are affected by the same risk. Again, I've covered all of this element inside some of my other videos, so I'm going to cut this one short. But basically, you have these 3 different portals, websites that people can log into and do different things depending on it. Enforcement, the UK approach to the enforcement of goods placed on the NI market is unchanged in line with the regulators' code. Enforcement continues to be proportionate, risk-based, intelligent-led. Further advice and guidance, we have some additional links here. And then you have these questions. Are you a manufacturer based in NI or EU? Yes. In almost all cases, your existing obligations are met. If so, product complies with general safety outline, you'll be considered compliant. Your details need to be on or accompany the product. It says that, except you need that representative. All along, I know that that's been the nail in the coffin. Yeah. Okay, I think that's it, folks. I think if you have products on the market before the 13th of December and you're confident that you can prove that 2024, you're confident that you can prove that that's fine, you can still sell them into Europe and Northern Ireland. How you then figure it all out when you're adding new products on later, that's up to you to sort. It is a requirement. Just because that you had some on before the 13th doesn't mean any others afterwards will comply. You will then in the future need to comply. But to sell into anywhere in the EU or Northern Ireland after the 13th of December or from the 13th of December, you need an EU representative in state. Yeah. I really hoped that with the Windsor Agreement that one element would be softened slightly, but it hasn't been. And I hate that I'm the one that is sharing that news to you if you're here with me right now, because you possibly were hoping, like me, that there would be a light at the end of the tunnel. And there hasn't been. At least not for products on the market from the 13th of December. I still don't know how anything up to the 13th of December is going to work, how you're going to prove it. They could turn around in the future and say, actually, we need you to have an EU representative to hold that documentation for us, because it's not clear. It doesn't say that they don't want that. Also doesn't say that they do, but that is my fear on that one. But we'll see. Time will tell. So anyway, there you go. Not great news. I'm Nicola Smith from A Handcrafted Business. I'm here because I want to help you to sell more of your products. But I guess that won't be happening in Northern Ireland or Europe unless you have an EU representative soon.